What's up, CS Youth? Welcome to another edition of Bible Stories with Ben. This week, we are continuing our journey through the Old Testament, through Genesis. Well, actually, we just ended Genesis last week. I don't know if you've been watching, but last week we ended with Joseph. This was a guy, remember, he had like the coat of many colors, sold to Egypt by his brothers. Well, he ended up becoming second in command there. And he brings his entire family and all of their families to come live with him in Egypt. That was actually 70 people. Like his brothers and his brothers' wives and their kids, 70 people. So now a whole bunch of Israelites live in Egypt. And then eventually Joseph dies, moves on. That's what people do when they get older. I don't know if you knew that. But Joseph eventually dies. His brothers eventually die. A couple generations go by. And the Israelites are just spreading in numbers, of course, because they're getting married, they're having more kids. After a few more generations, the Israelites are now starting to outnumber even the Egyptians in Egypt. So naturally, the Pharaoh, who's like the king of Egypt, starting to get a little bit nervous about all these Israelites in his country. He's thinking, you know what, I don't even know when these people got here, because that was ancient history, but we got to do something about this, because what if they get angry and they decide to kill us? So, like most bad decisions, the Pharaoh acts out of fear, and he tells everyone, hey, we're actually going to make the Israelites our slaves. Yeah. So now the whole Joseph thing's not looking quite as great, because it's kind of set up this whole moment where now all of the Israelites in Egypt are being enslaved, and they're being treated terribly, just terribly. But the Israelites continue to grow in number, so the Pharaoh decides to make an even more drastic, even more terrible decision out of fear. And he tells every single Egyptian in the country, hey, if you see a baby boy Israelite, throw him in the river. Yeah. Throw a baby boy in the river. That's what they decide to do. They decide to actually kill every single baby boy who's an Israelite. I know, super messed up. Well, there's this Israelite mom who has just had a baby boy, and he's just beautiful. And of course, she doesn't want him to get thrown in the river. And she has this idea. She's desperate. This isn't something you would ever do as a mom, except in maybe a situation like this. She gets a basket, make sure like the bottom is sealed. She puts her baby boy in a basket, and she sets him down the river, just hoping that someone, somewhere, will see this baby, not know it's an Israelite baby, and will take care of him. Really sad moment that she'd even have to do that. But God comes through for this mom and for this baby boy, because who else finds the baby but the princess of Egypt, Pharaoh's own daughter, finds this baby. And she's just smitten. She's like, oh, he's so cute, little baby. And I don't know how old she was, probably not an adult yet, because she's not able to raise the baby yet, but she wants him for her own. So she goes and finds an Israelite slave to take care of her baby for her. And the Israelite slave she chooses is the baby's real mom. So God is really taking care of her in this moment. Like, she gets her baby that she just set down the river, she gets him back. And she gets to raise him, at least for a few years. Because a few years go by, Moses starts to get a little bit older. I'm sure the princess is older. And Moses' mom has to bring him back to the princess to be raised as Egyptian royalty, which I'm guessing she was happy to do, because that's a much better life than being a slave, of course. And so he's raised as Egyptian royalty, and things are probably great. The Bible doesn't actually talk a whole lot about that period of time, about him growing up as an Egyptian, which is interesting. Because most of this, we believe, is like tradition passed down from Moses. So he doesn't record that time of him being an Egyptian. But if you really want to kind of explore that, and you want to see some imaginary stuff about what it might have been like, then the movie Prince of Egypt is really good at doing that. And that kind of explores that whole part of his life. But in the Bible, many years go by, And one day, he's an adult now. He's an adult Egyptian, and he's walking just down the street in Egypt. You can picture maybe the pyramids at his sides, right? And there's the slaves everywhere working hard, building all these Egyptian structures. Moses sees off to his right, he sees a Hebrew slave, Hebrew Israelite, same thing. He sees a Hebrew slave being beaten by an Egyptian. And I'm sure Moses has seen this happen before. You know, he's a grown man at this point, and the slaves in Egypt were treated terribly. But for whatever reason, this time, something kicks a little fire in him. This time, a voice tells him, I can't let this happen. And so he looks both ways. He makes sure no one's watching. I don't know if he pulls out a dagger or he pulls a rock. The Bible doesn't tell us. But he comes up on this guy, on this Egyptian, and he kills him. And then he buries him in the sand. And the Hebrew slave is able to get away. And Moses is super nervous, right? He's looking around, making sure no one saw him. He runs back home. He gathers all of his stuff together. He's like, oh man, this is crazy. What's going to happen to me? He goes to bed that night, terrified about what just happened and if anybody will find out. Wakes up the next morning and goes for a walk again. This time, he sees two people beating each other up again. This time, they're both Hebrew slaves. And he says, hey, knock it off, you two. And one of the slaves looks at him and says, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian yesterday? They knew. Everyone knew what Moses had done. So Moses freaks out. You know, he gets whatever he can together, whatever he can carry on his back, and he runs away from home into the wilderness. And that's where we're going to pick up next week. So make sure that you tune in to the next Bible Stories with Ben, where we're going to explore the second half of Moses' life.